From the Skyterra Wellness Retreat, this is the Inspired Intentions Podcast, where we help people build the skills and mindset to live a healthy life. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, if you've been enjoying our podcast, take a moment to rate and review. It may seem like a small thing, but our ratings and reviews make a huge difference in the quality of our show. They help us reach more listeners like you so we can continue bringing you more amazing content. So, if you've found inspiration, learned something new, or just love tuning in every week, please rate the Inspired Intentions Podcast 5 stars and leave us a review and even share with a friend. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's get into the show. Inspired Intentions listeners, welcome back. Today we have a conversation about something that I will admittedly say I know very little about. We have brought none other than Claire back onto the podcast. Hey, Claire.
Hey, Alan. How's it going today?
I'm doing good. Coming into this one with an open mind, which is always fun. So that starts off a good day. That thing that I admittedly really don't know much about and Claire knows a lot about is Pilates. And today we wanted to bring you a conversation all around Pilates 101. What is Pilates? What are the different types of Pilates? Can Pilates be good for weight loss? Does it have other benefits?
I'm looking forward to it. Pilates has been such a game changer in my own regimen, and it's just so empowering, I feel. So I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Well, for listeners, a reminder, Claire has been on here before. Claire, you were on here for a breathwork podcast, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And why don't you just remind any listener that didn't get a chance to listen to that breathwork podcast who you are?
Sure. Well, my name is Claire. I'm our program director here at Skyterra, and I have the pleasure of getting to help with things like scheduling and getting to support some of our amazing instructors and teammates. And I also have the pleasure of getting to teach a lot of our classes, such as Pilates and yoga and breath work, and I fill in for some of our fitness offerings and things like that. So it's never a dull day, and I truly enjoy it with all my heart.
Solid. Well, I think I'd like to start with this idea of Pilates 101. What is Pilates, different types of Pilates, that type of thing?
Sure. Well, Pilates is a form of low-impact movement, and it's oftentimes very focused on strengthening the core and lengthening the muscles, so enhancing flexibility and mobility. But there are a lot of strength benefits to it as well. And some of the different types of Pilates are you can do mat Pilates, which can either be just with your body weight or using very minimal equipment such as resistance bands or a Pilates circle, possibly light dumbbells, but usually very minimal.
What's a Pilates circle?
So it's sometimes called a Pilates circle. You may hear it referred to in different ways, but it's basically a circle. And sometimes you place it between your thighs and you might squeeze in and out on it. You may use it for some arm movements to enhance posture.
Okay.
But it literally looks like a circle.
Gotcha. Okay. What else?
There is also a megaformer, which can be kind of intimidating in its appearance, and a microformer, which is a smaller version of the megaformer, as well as the traditional reformer, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about.
Interesting. Sounds like a transformer.
Yeah, it really does. It kind of looks like it too.
Oh, cool.
So today I'd love to talk a little bit more about mat Pilates. That's my personal favorite, and I feel like it's just so great for so many reasons. It can be portable, so if you're on vacation or if you're just trying to do something in front of the TV, you just need your own body, and you can make a really solid routine out of just using your own body and moving through some of the traditional movements. And I love teaching Pilates at Skyterra because I think it shows people a different way of moving their body where they're still going to feel really challenged and feel that they got a lot of really good strength movements involved, but that it's also a nice way that they can be stretching at the same time. So you can really get a good bang for your buck with Pilates, get a lot done at one time.
So to me, what I just heard, it sounds like there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of angles that you can go about it. You can make it very in-depth and complex or very, very simple.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to look at it.
Okay.
And it can also be as small as a 5-minute routine of just doing a bridge sequence, for example, or it could be a full 1 hour or 90-minute class where you're moving through all of your muscle groups and approaching it from the accessory muscles to the larger muscle groups as well.
Gotcha. For you in specific, what got you into Pilates? How has it been beneficial for you? I assume it has, but how has it been beneficial for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of this will overlap with our first podcast. So if any of you listen to that, you may remember some of my story. So I'll just summarize it today. But essentially, I was going through a really intense period in college where I was dealing with some grief that turned to a lot of anxiety because I didn't know how to process the grief very well. And if you're in a similar place, I encourage you to go listen to the Breathwork podcast.
That was a good one.
But it also really started affecting my physical body. All of the grief and the anxiety, it started manifesting as a lot of health issues. And my previous way of moving my body and even nourishing my body was just no longer working. I had previously been doing a lot of strength workouts with a lot of heavy dumbbells and barbells and things like that, and a lot of really high intensity cardio. And my body just started getting so inflamed, and my energy was tanking so bad, and my cortisol was skyrocketing and all of that. And so I really just had to kind of take a step back and reevaluate my approach to movement. And it was through that time period where I discovered this approach called Ballet Beautiful, where it kind of blended ballet and mat Pilates.
Mm-hmm.
But the mat Pilates videos were some of my favorites because it would burn so bad, but it was also kind of calming at the same time.
Yeah.
And I started realizing that I was getting the same type of benefits in a different way than I had been getting previously through some of my strength workouts before my body kind of started going haywire. So
Gotcha.
it really taught me that different modalities of movement can serve us in different ways and in different seasons. So it's all about, being in that ebb and flow and learning how to listen to our bodies. But Pilates was really a great way for me to come back to movement in a way that served me at that time and continues to serve me because my body just seems to respond better to lower impact and lower intensity when it comes to like amping up our heart rate and stuff now due to hormonal imbalances and things that a lot of us face.
Mm-hmm. So you do have experience doing both like reformer Pilates and mat Pilates, but you started with mat Pilates?
That's correct. I started with mat Pilates and I got really into it, and I ended up teaching at a Pilates studio, and I started with teaching just some of the yoga classes there, and then I started teaching a Pilates stretch class where I was introducing some mat Pilates, and then I started teaching on the reformers and megaformers and all of those things too.
Gotcha. I did look it up while you were talking, just for listeners. Claire's previous episode was episode 194, episode 194 of this podcast, and it was the title is Breathe Easy, Transform Your Life with Simple Breathwork Techniques.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely. So going on that kind of same topic about the difference of mat Pilates and reformer Pilates, what are the differences between using like equipment and just using a mat, or maybe some small things on the mat?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest differences we've already kind of touched on doing just mat Pilates is very portable, which can make it more accessible to people and also allow it to be a way where you can have kind of bite-sized pieces of movement throughout the day. Whereas oftentimes with a reformer or a megaformer, you would be going to a studio or having to invest a good bit of money to have that equipment at your house.
Yeah.
For mat Pilates, I feel like you can approach it in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it may be used in something like physical therapy, where you're doing lower repetitions and you're helping to rehabilitate different muscle groups, helping to improve that range of motion again and kind of nurse the body back to a healthier place. And that would look very different than like the Pilates classes that I offer here, where anyone that's taken them can attest. It's much more of an intense form of mat Pilates. I mean, we're still not amping up our heart rate or raising the cortisol or anything like that, but I get a lot of groaning in that class, and sometimes some words are shouted out that I won't repeat here on the podcast. So if that gives you kind of a clearer picture of what mat Pilates can also feel like, it can really be kind of amped up or toned down depending on the person's intention and the state of their body going into it. With something like the reformer, you're really having some assistance from that equipment in order to find the proper alignment. And it can help people to improve their flexibility because you would use things like leg springs or springs for the arms, which can help people to potentially come into a range of motion in kind of an assisted way that they may not be able to do on their own just yet. So there can be sometimes additional benefits when it comes to a flexibility focus to using a machine like a reformer. And I would say the reformer is probably best and most known for the ability to really lengthen the muscles and help people just feel more elongated and improve posture and things like that.
When you say lengthen the muscles, what do you mean by that?
So, lengthening the muscles can mean a few different things. It can mean releasing tension that can kind of keep the muscles feeling contracted. And if you were to visualize your muscles, a lot of times when we don't
Mm-hmm.
have something like yoga or Pilates incorporated in our regimen, they kind of stay just balled up into a tight knot of tension, of soreness, inflammation, things like that. And when we're able to bring some of that up to the surface and work through it in a dynamic way through something like Pilates, we can release that tension and help the muscles to relax, which would instantly elongate them because they're no longer bound up.
Yeah.
But it can also just help to improve the flexibility of the muscles, which can also kind of visually and internally leave the muscles feeling longer.
Perfect. And so does that translate from, you were kind of going through and describing the reformer as well, that translates kind of through all types of Pilates?
Kind of. The megaformer, I would say, is a little bit more strength focused, and it can
Mm-hmm.
also be a more cardiovascular
Okay.
workout. You would be doing oftentimes more standing movements, sometimes at a quicker pace. For both mat Pilates and reformer, most of the movements are going to be really slow and controlled. Whereas with the megaformer, you may have some of those slow and controlled movements, and they may also have some more traditional lunges and squats at more of a traditional pace,
Mm-hmm.
but still using things like a sliding board or springs and things that just add resistance and keep the muscles under a different type of tension. It also weighs like around 400 pounds, I think. So it's a pretty big piece of
Oh,
equipment.
wow.
Kind of looks like a huge bed with boards that slide up and down, and you can come into some crazy plank variations and things like that.
Mm.
So it's very strengthening, but I think it also takes a lot of body awareness or a great instructor that can really monitor the class and come around to offer people really individualized attention, because it is a huge, massive machine. So it takes a lot more to be able to control it. And I think it's easier for people to get injured on machines like that if they aren't keeping a close watch of their own body or they aren't having someone that can help them do that.
Understood. And what about, say, the microformer?
Yeah, so the microformer is supposed to be kind of a miniature version of the megaformer. You can do similar movements, but obviously you're a little more limited since it's more like 50 pounds versus 400 pounds.
Okay.
But it can help to do more refined movements, and it can also be something that's a little easier to access for purchasing for home, for example. So most people are probably not going to get a 400-pound piece of equipment and put in their living room, but
Right.
they might get something that's like 5 feet long and 50 pounds that could go in their home studio space or really anywhere, because it's much easier to travel with it.
Before we jump into the mat portion of it, describe, like, in general, what, because you kind of spoke about springs and the sliding board, and it looks like a bed. Like, what, could you go a little bit more in depth on what a reformer or micro, or was the other one the mega reformer, what those all look like?
Sure. So a megaformer is really massive, and it kind of looks like it would probably have a few different sections, but they're all going to have a really wide base.
Okay.
And then the springs could attach from the bottom part or the top part, and you may take hold of them to do things like a bicep curl while you're doing a lunge, for example. And then that backboard might be sliding back and when you're coming into the lunge, and then coming forward when you're rising up.
Okay.
So basically, it's just a really dynamic, massive piece of equipment. And you may also be able to use those bottom leg springs to hook your feet in or something and do things like leg lifts or leg circles. So it really does kind of look like it sounds, where it's just a massive sliding board that has different crazy springs attached to it with handles or different attachments. And it just basically intensifies everything that you would utilize it for.
And so the springs that you're speaking of have handles on them that you can grab a hold of. They're not necessarily just attached to the part that slides.
Right, kind of both. Like they are attached to the base
Gotcha.
of the machine.
Okay.
And you could take hold of the handles that would most likely also be attached, or straps if you're putting your foot in. And then the reformer, it's usually going to have more supine movements, so lying down on your back, which can be really great for people that are either easing into movement and may not have a lot of stability yet to do standing movements, or they may be nursing an injury, or may just be trying to improve their posture and core as a primary focus and flexibility. And that
Okay.
kind of helps to take some of the other unnecessary elements out of it if that's the primary intention and focus.
And I'm assuming because the reformer is like the most commonly known, it was the original, and then the micro is just a smaller spin off, and the mega is just a larger spin off of the same thing.
So my understanding is the reformer was first, and
Yeah.
that's more traditional and what
Gotcha.
you would see in most traditional studios. And then the megaformer was created as a more intense, strength-focused, dynamic form of a reformer with more standing movements involved. And then the micro was created after the megaformer to create a smaller, more accessible version of the megaformer.
Gotcha. Well, let's dive into the mat portion of it now that I kind of have a better visualization of what the whole reformer looks like. Because if it started out with this, really kind of intricate sounding piece of equipment, how does the mat play into all this?
Yeah, good question. So I would say with mat Pilates, you can mimic some of the same movements that you would do with a reformer, but you're not going to have the support or assistance of the springs or the handles that you may be holding on to with the reformer or megaformer. So it's essentially teaching you how to utilize and control your own body. And in some ways, it can kind of take everything up a notch because you're having to really rely on your own core and your own alignment to be able to do things like circles or leg lifts and lowers and things like that. So I would say if you were to look at someone doing a reformer workout, you could kind of take that body and put it on a mat and have them do the same
Gotcha.
thing, but without all of the equipment. And then you may do some additional things in a mat Pilates class that you wouldn't see with a reformer, like a bridge sequence and things like that as well.
Okay.
Another great benefit to mat Pilates, which can be translated over to the other styles of Pilates as well, is you really can vary the repetitions, which we already touched on. But I think even within each workout, even if you already have set a specific intention, it's so important to listen to our bodies. And we all have different strengths and different areas of weakness. I think Pilates can definitely quickly reveal some of our areas of weakness to us, which can make it kind of a humbling workout sometimes. But if we are noticing a certain movement as one of those areas of weakness for us, then we may not want to do as many repetitions of that as we would do for a movement that we might feel stronger in. So whenever I teach the Pilates class, for example, I always encourage people at the beginning to do the amount of repetitions that takes them to a healthy challenge point for them that day. And then they can either stop and stretch and then maybe re-enter the move and do a few more repetitions depending on how they're feeling. Or they may just need to say that 3 or 5 repetitions, however many, was enough for that move that day. Maybe tomorrow or the next week, they'll be able to do a few more. Maybe not, and that's okay. It's meant to be a fluid journey with Pilates. And I think even in a class setting, it's just so important to let your own body be your best indicator of when to stop a movement, because Pilates can be intense in that oftentimes movements will build on each other. So you may do a full range of motion of something, and then you may change that variation up slightly, and then move into some circles or some pulsing, all with minimal rest. And that can definitely create that deep burn that oftentimes we feel when we're doing something like Pilates. And if we're taking it too far, then that's when we're putting ourselves at that risk for injury or just really hating it. And that's not going to be beneficial either, because nothing is going to be sustainable if we find ourselves at the end of it absolutely hating it and dreading the next time we're going to do it.
Right.
So I
Right.
think both physically and mentally, we need to keep ourselves in a zone that feels healthy and feels like enough discomfort for growth and for improvement, but not so much that it's taking it into pain physically or mentally.
You feel like you can get this out of a mat Pilates workout?
Absolutely. And I've had some people at Skyterra tell us that it's actually one of the hardest classes and that we need to add an exclamation point afterwards. We put an exclamation point after some of our harder class offerings. And a lot of times I think that they're challenged in a way that they were surprised by. And it can also be taken down, like I said, though, as long as you have that discipline and courage to listen to your body. If you're needing a lower impact and intensity day, then not doing the full amount of repetitions would serve that person best that day.
So it sounds like you don't really need a lot of equipment for this type of workout. Like you could add stuff to it, but it sounds like all that you really need is exactly what it says, just a mat. and your
Right.
body.
Yep, absolutely. And when I teach the class at Skyterra, I purposefully don't use any equipment other than I tell them to grab a blanket. Sometimes if we're lying on our back for a while, the tailbone might get sensitive, or if we're
Mm.
lying on our hip, then hip might get sensitive, or knee, same thing. So the blanket is more for cushion and for support. But I love to show people that they don't need any equipment, so that if they are feeling limited with their ability to add a lot of things in at home, they know that they don't have to. But also, like I'd mentioned earlier, it's great for travel, or if you're just wanting to do something and maybe limited both time and equipment and space wise. It shows you can still get a great workout with just your body as your instrument.
So what type of mat do you actually need? Is it a yoga mat? I mean,
Yep, you can use just a basic yoga mat. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a yoga mat for mat Pilates, because you're not really doing too many things that would require you to have a good grip on the mat or anything like that. So you could even use just a blanket that's thick enough, or a towel, or really whatever you have available to you, even
mm-hmm.
your carpet at home,
Yeah.
just as long as you have enough support for the joints. And that's when a second blanket or something like that could come in handy as well. If the person knows that they have sensitivities anywhere or is unsure, then having something that you can slide underneath the body if it's starting to ache anywhere is always a good thing.
So at this point, now that I kind of, when I asked about the yoga mat, it made me think of this, like maybe somebody else is thinking this too. How does this actually differ from yoga? Because you could do
Good
a
question.
yoga for strength class, and
Yeah.
it sounds like something very similar to me, who I
Mm-hmm.
don't know anything about this. So
Sure.
how does it differ?
I would say Pilates is more dynamic than even a yoga for strength class would be. That would
Okay.
probably be more like vinyasa or flow based. Whereas for Pilates, you're usually taking one movement at a time, but then doing several repetitions. Like I usually use around 15 or 16 repetitions for each movement if it's a full range of motion. And if we're doing something like a pulse, then we usually double that. So we might do like around 30 to 40 repetitions of something like a pulse. You probably wouldn't ever see that many repetitions of any move in yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Even for something that you're repeating, like a downward dog to a plank, for example, you might do it like 5 times and then flow into the next position. So I think the repetitions can vary greatly. We also really work the smaller muscles in Pilates with things like pulsing and circles, whereas I would say with yoga, it's kind of more focused on the larger muscle groups actually, and you're coming into bigger positions like warrior poses or planks and things like that. Whereas in Pilates, you're probably going to be doing like leg lifts and a controlled range of motion, but never really more expansive positions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Describe this pulse you've been talking about. What do you mean by pulse?
Yeah,
I
so
think I know, but
sure.
yeah.
It would be a really small range of motion. I usually tell people to try not to exceed about an inch. And you're probably going to either be lifting your leg up and down at about an inch, or maybe in a push up position, coming up and down about an inch. Or
Gotcha.
really, you can do it in all types of positions, bridges and tricep dips, things like that. But it's meant to still be a contraction. So it's just a very focused, isolated contraction. It can be tricky because you can sometimes cheat a pulse a little bit if you're just kind of bouncing through it, or just kind of
Gotcha.
uncontrollably moving your body up and down. But if you think about really engaging the core and drawing the other muscles in that you're focusing on, then it can get you to that place where you really feel the burn of the muscles, where you know
Understood.
that those smaller accessory muscles are getting some attention and are probably getting a lot stronger in that moment.
Gotcha. Good answer. So as far as our guests, because you've talked a little bit about their experience,
Mm-hmm.
some calling, certain types intense, but saying that there's a lot of options out there. What do you notice about our guests after they take one class? Is it a sense of enjoyment? Are they sad they took the class? Like, what are? I'm sure it's not the second one, but what are they noticing?
Maybe sad a few moments during the class. No, just
Yeah,
kidding.
right.
But I would say that they always seem to be really energized afterwards. I think they feel proud of themselves for
Mm,
accomplishing something that did feel challenging in the moment, but that didn't bring them to that place of such extreme exhaustion where then they need to go take a nap or rest for the next hour. I feel like Pilates kind of takes us into just enough challenge where in the moment we're like, I might need to give up, but I'm going to keep going. And then afterwards, we're able to really reap the benefits of persevering, but in a way that was lower impact and really safe for our joints and kind to our hormones and cortisol and things like that. So I feel like they seem really energized and uplifted, and that sense of accomplishment. They'll also oftentimes share that they already feel taller, that they feel like their hips have unlocked,
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah.
Very physical benefits in terms of mobility, flexibility, and just even how they feel throughout the rest of that day, standing a little taller, maybe having a more upright chest with shoulders drawn back, things like that, that are really great benefits because they can be carried over into our lives back home as well.
I'm trying to parallel it with some of my experiences, and what it sounds like is very much so. I have some guests that do things with me that in the moment it feels like it is very challenging, like you said, that they might give up.
Mm-hmm.
But then they're oddly surprised that afterwards they're like, I'm fine.
Right.
I feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Even the next day, they're like, I might be a little sore, but like I'm not nearly as tired as I thought I'd be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the follow up to that is directly after that kind of epiphany. I hear a lot of like, I think that's something I could do at home.
Yes, absolutely. And I
Is
think
that
some of
okay?
our offerings and classes probably really do parallel with one another, like Tai Chi, Pilates, hiking. They all can be really taken up or taken down, I feel like, in terms of the amount of challenge, but are also very mindful practices
Hmm.
and really connect people to their own body more than any other external piece of equipment or anything else. Not that there's anything wrong with those types of classes or utilizing equipment that can come with so many benefits as well, obviously. But a lot of these offerings that you and I seem to focus on really kind of connect people to themselves and to
Mm-hmm.
their breath, to the power of their mind. And like you said, that sense of going on a journey where there is challenge involved, there's moments of possibly feeling discouraged, and then persevering and reaching into that place of inner fire that we
Yeah.
all have, where then courage is born and resilience and things like that.
Yeah. It's all good benefits. So, for somebody that's listening to this right now, what suggestions do you have for them?
Well, ideally, we'd love to see you at Skyterra and come
Sure.
take a Pilates class with us.
Yeah.
Love to have you anytime at Skyterra or in Pilates. But there are also a lot of good online resources now, I feel like, for any form of movement. So you
Hmm.
can go to YouTube or something like that and just look for Mat Pilates. And then, even if you don't want to do a full video, just fast forward, find one section of it. Maybe start with one section, like a bridge, like I mentioned earlier, or an upper body segment where you're just kind of getting a 5 minute little taste of Pilates,
Mm-hmm.
noticing how that landed for your body. And then if it felt good to you, you could go and do the next section of the video or whatever works for that person for their day and the time that they have available to them. But I think because Pilates can be simplified so much after you even do just one or two videos, you can start to pull from it. I mean, we can all think about things like leg lifts, circles, pulses once we've done it once or twice. And then we don't have to rely on a video or another person every time. I think that sometimes pulling cues in from other people can be beneficial to fine tune our placement and to push a little bit further and things like that. But we can just kind of come onto our backs and start lifting and lowering our legs and then do a smaller range of motion and then take it into a circle or and do that in all fours and then a sideline position and kind
Mm-hmm.
of guide ourselves through our own Pilates workout, just using very basic movements in a specific pattern.
Nice.
And they also could book a virtual Pilates session with myself. And I really
Oh,
love getting to do that because it feels like I'm home with the person for a minute, guiding them through a Pilates class, but also empowering them to be able to do a Pilates workout at home with minimal equipment or space required.
that's cool. So,
Yeah.
guests can or listeners can log on to our website and book
Mm-hmm.
a virtual mat Pilates with you.
Yep,
Oh, I
exactly.
didn't know that.
And it can be specific to any goal. So maybe they are rehabilitating from an injury or something
Yeah.
like that. We can do it more physical therapy focused. I'm not a physical therapist, but I have a pretty in depth background with different forms of movement and training of the body. So I feel like I have a good enough understanding of anatomy to be able to help someone rehabilitate after an injury. or it could be a specific physical goal, like improving flexibility
Yeah.
or even just defining the triceps more. Sometimes women will ask me that, like, how do I tone the back of the arms or the armpit area? So we could do something very specific as well if there's like an aesthetic
Yeah.
focus that the person has.
Nice. Well, I have to say I didn't know anything, and now I know a little bit more.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And now hopefully we'll see you join us for a Pilates class one day here at Skyterra, right?
Yeah, if I'm ever around.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a tricky thing. Maybe one day we can do a hike with Pilates at the top of a mountain.
Our guests might hate that.
It would really be taking them on a journey.
Yeah, right. They might love it though. I'm down to try it
Could
for
be
sure.
the next new thing. You never know.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Well, thanks for coming on here and talking a little bit about it, Claire. I appreciate it. If you have any questions and you want to ask Claire or any of our professionals anything, you can shoot us an email at inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com.
Thanks, Alan. It was a joy to be back, and thanks everyone for listening.
Anytime. And again, go back and listen to Claire's other episode 194, all about breath work. And we will catch you all next week.
The Inspired Intentions podcast is a production of Skyterra Wellness Retreat. Special thanks to our executive producer, Alan Broyhill. Send us your questions and comments to inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. Subscribe on iTunes and everywhere podcasts can be found. If someone you know might benefit from this podcast, share Inspired Intentions with them and give us a 5-star rating. Join us next week as we cut through the unrealistic noise on diets and fitness and show you how healthy living fits seamlessly into your already busy life. Thanks for listening.